Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Robin Budish, and I am the director of Transit Choices. Transit Choices mission, we have been advocating for over a decade now, it's hard to believe, advocating for a first-rate regional transit system in Baltimore and throughout Maryland. It is a system that is equitable, efficient, reliable, and certainly safe. We have two presentations for you this morning, and we are delighted to introduce our first guest speaker, Baltimore City Council President Zeke Cohen. The title of his presentation is Transit Investment in Baltimore's Moment. And a quick synopsis is that he will share his perspective on Baltimore City's transportation future and why continued investments in transit at the local, state, and federal levels are essential for achieving this vision. Council President Cohen, good morning and welcome.
Hey, good morning. It's great to be with you all. Thank you so much to Robin. Thank you to my staff who's on this call, Ethan Hashuk. It is really, really good to be with you this morning. My name is Zeke Cohen. I know most of you, and I'm proud to serve as president for the 74th term of the Baltimore City Council. I'm excited to get to talk about how much I love Baltimore and why we need continued transit investment. Baltimore is having a moment. First and most importantly, we have great people and great leaders at every level of government. When Mayor Scott and I aren't kayaking on the Inner Harbor, we're working together with my colleagues on the council to make our city thrive. And while we do not always agree, I could not ask for a partner in the executive branch who is more devoted to our city's success, including the success of our transit system. I'm also grateful for our City Council Land Use and Transportation Chair, Ryan Dorsey, who centers transportation in his work, lives and breathes it, bikes all over town, and is wonky and laser focused on getting better outcomes. Over the past few years, we've seen record declines in homicides and non-fatal shootings. For folks who follow the news, and not just the news coming out of our president's mouth, we are seeing the lowest amount of killings in our city ever since we started counting this year. Last year, we saw our population increase after a 10-year slide. There is so much energy and vibrance in our culture and art scene. I'm a foodie, and I'm confident that Baltimore has the best food scene on the East Coast, if not the entire US. We have great cultural institutions that are intentional in their commitment to serving our whole city. I love going to center stage with my wife, Rena. We're getting to see Nas perform at the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. We have great festivals. We have a gorgeous waterfront. We have proximity to New York and DC. While our schools have a long way to go, they are getting better every single year. And I'm a proud parent of two Baltimore City public school students at Hampstead Hill Elementary. We have some of the best meds, hospitals, colleges in the world concentrated here in Baltimore. We have a lot to be proud of. But unfortunately, our residents can't access the things they need to live and thrive because our transit system has experienced decades of disinvestment and neglect. Recent reporting by the Baltimore Banner and research by the Fund for Educational Excellence, and I see my friend Roger Schulman on the call, and I know he's coming up next, so I'm not going to steal his spotlight, but they've highlighted just how difficult it is for our students to get to school and how late buses contribute to chronic absenteeism. I know this because I'm a former middle school teacher. And of course, our city's transit disinvestment must be understood in the context of a history of racial segregation. Our beloved and recently departed friend Samuel Jordan of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition used to remind us that decisions like canceling the Red Line were rooted in racism. In 2021, Samuel partnered with the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins to map the need for transit investment in communities, and the map looks all too familiar to the redlining maps from nearly a century ago. Baltimore hasn't built new rail service in nearly 30 years. The cities who are growing and thriving in the 21st century are those that have made transit investments, major transit investments. And it's not just cities in the deep blue states that one would expect, but cities like Houston, Charlotte, and Atlanta. Even Indianapolis, which sits in a state that banned light rail investments in 2014, has built an innovative and wildly successful bus rapid transit line that generated over $700 million in economic development. It has another one opening in 2028 and a third line in planning. This sort of aggressive, intentional approach to project delivery and network building is what Baltimore's transit deserves. By the way, we have excellent leadership in state government too. Our governor is a former resident and a champion for Baltimore. Our city delegation in Annapolis fights for our fair share of funding every session, and usually they win. Administrator Arnold is a transit rider, which is all too rare for transit agency leadership, and the MDOT MTA team has some of the most dedicated public servants I've ever met. That's why when we saw last year's MDOT's draft capital budget, which funded state of good repair at MTA below the floor required by the Transit Safety and Investment Act, we had to speak up. Mayor Scott, Councilman Dorsey, my colleagues on the council, the City House delegation, community partners, and I spoke with a unified voice about the need for investment. I'm grateful to say MDOT listened. Between the draft and the final budgets, about $800 million in funding was restored for the MTA. Not only does this keep our transportation system functioning, it keeps us in the running for future grant opportunities for major projects that require us to fund state of good repair as a prerequisite. And I just want to say briefly, it was a tense meeting. I remember confronting the former secretary, who I liked very much, and saying, you're making all this investment in WMATA, so tell me why a rider in Montgomery County should be worth more than a rider in West Baltimore. I will say there were some folks that did not like the rhetoric, but in the end, they took action, and that's what matters. This Monday, the MDOT Roadshow returns to City Hall. We'll be there again, advocating for continued state of good repair investment, our city's fair share of HUR, and implementation of the BMore bus plan. After my presentation, Roger and the team from the Fund for Educational Excellence is going to tell you all about BMore bus. We're grateful that they will be joining us on Monday as well, and we're grateful to MTA for telling us in clear terms exactly what it would take to properly serve the 80% of their ridership who ride the bus, both what it would look like and what it would cost. Look, great transit requires not only financial capital, but political capital as well. Transit planner Christoph Spieler talks about how good transit lines serve dense places, and that makes building great transit difficult because density means you have more political actors. But our history shows us the alternative. Running the light rail along a former freight rail was politically expedient, and the views of Lake Roland are great, but as a result, it misses all of the places where there are lots of people who could ride it. Furthermore, when it does pass through downtown, it's not given real priority at traffic signals, unlike many great light rail projects across the country. When we build along the literal path of least resistance, we build projects that do not align investment with need, and the result is low ridership. That's why we need to build the Red Line, continue planning the North-South corridor, listen to our residents and address their concerns, but not compromise on the need to serve dense places and connect residents to employment centers and schools. Also, I fully believe that transit investment is not only good policy, but good politics. In 2015, when I was campaigning to be councilperson for the first district, I had many a door slammed in my face in Canton for my support of the Red Line. But here I am, as council president, 10 years later, still unapologetically supporting the Red Line. And by the way, we have a new generation of community association leadership in Canton that is also strongly supportive. We've also seen progressive leaders across the country, including Zoran Mondani in New York and Michelle Wu in Boston, who center transportation in their campaigns and win. Meanwhile, let's acknowledge we are in a very difficult moment for transit investment at the state and federal levels. Pennsylvania and Illinois have recently failed to address transit in their state budgets. Philadelphia has elected to tap into $394 million in capital budget allocation for the next 2 years to avoid what would have been a 35% reduction in service. At the federal level, I'm told staffing is substantially down at the Federal Transit Administration. Just days ago, Charlotte experienced a tragic crime of violence on its light rail. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy threatened to revoke federal funding for Charlotte's transit system. This is obviously not an effective response to violence. None of this is surprising, given the longstanding hostility to transit from the Koch brothers, from Elon Musk, the Heritage Foundation, and the Republican Party at large. While I'm confident that Maryland will not go the way of Pennsylvania and Illinois, we have seen the impacts of a former governor who defunded transit, even giving back $900 million in federal funding secured for the Red Line. And we need to explore funding and governance models that ensure that Baltimore gets what we need for decades to come. Overall, we are in a difficult moment for transit, but I am confident that Baltimore will meet this moment. And I want to take a quick moment to just thank you all at Transit Choices. It is exactly this kind of network that we need. It is this kind of advocacy that we need, because this really is about making lawmakers make the right choice, and not just the right choice because we all want a choo-choo train and it's fun, but because it is a strong, smart economic investment in our city, our region, and our state's future. And so I appreciate all the convening, all the advocacy that you all do. It is really good to be with you all among friends this morning, and I'll be glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We thank you for sharing your vision and your valuable time with us this morning. We would also like to acknowledge and congratulate you for being named 2025 Aspen Institute Ascend Fellow. So we read that with great pride and very happy for you. So congratulations. Would you kindly take the presentation off the screen just so I can see? And everyone will share Council President's presentation by the end of today. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment or provide feedback, you may either raise your hand or you may put your comment in the chat, and we will make every effort to get to each one. So let me just see. Jimmy, I see you're off mute. Did you have a question or a comment for Council President?
Yeah, I would love to make a comment.
Sure.
It was great to hear what you said. We haven't talked to you directly in a while, Zeke, and I'm thrilled with your approach and the speech that you gave, the presentation you gave. And I just wanted to let you know that and how much we appreciate it, because we're all in this fight together.
That's right.
And I agree with you also about the leadership we have in this state. we've been working a lot with MTA and MDOT and City Dot, and we're always so impressed by the people in these organizations, how conscientious and hardworking, and what great values they have in terms of transit. So we have the people assembled. The question always comes back to funding. And we have to find a dedicated revenue stream to not only keep us in a state of good repair, but to expand our system, as you are talking about. And that'll only be done if we find a source to raise regionally the money we need for that's dedicated to improving our transit system. And that's what Transit Choices is pushing for now, a dedicated revenue stream and a regional ability to develop revenue for that. So thank you. I just want to thank you, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Jimmy. I know you've been at this for a very, very, very long time, and I've always appreciated your leadership. I do, like you said, want to shout out Veronica Macbeth, who is our DOT lead, Department of Transportation leader for the city of Baltimore. She, of course, has a lot of federal experience, a lot of local and state experience. She's been outstanding. And you're absolutely right. It is about a regional approach. We cannot let Virginia or other places continue to eat our lunch. And for us to be economically viable and competitive in this region, we have to make smart, steady, like you said, secure investments in transit. There is no other way. When I think about all the growth we're seeing in Northern Virginia, when I think about just this little part of Maryland where we have so many assets, we have so much strength in terms of academia and biotech and cyber and all the rest, we have to make it viable for people to get around town here in Baltimore and to get into the suburbs, to get to DC, to get to all these places quickly. And that means not only state of good repair, but really having a secure funding source. So could not agree more, and looking forward to continuing that fight with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Klaus?
Yeah, Hasi, good to see you. Thanks for your remarks. You mentioned BMore bus, and I believe MDOT is going to be in the city on Monday with their roadshow. And you probably know that in the draft CTP, the BMore bus project is not funded for the next 6 years. So it's really necessary that that CTP gets amended so that BMore bus begins to be funded, because BMore bus is probably the most effective way to improve the transit infrastructure that we have on the ground. And so that's one point. The other is MDOT leadership and so on. We do like them. We have good communication with them, but we do also have to realize that there's still a strong emphasis on widening roadways, that they are talking about funding another lane on 97, for example, I-97 to Annapolis, instead of building a rail line between Baltimore and Annapolis along Ritchie Highway or on the old rail corridor. So, I mean, there's still lots of work to do in lobbying for more emphasis on transit and less capacity addition on roads. Thanks.
Yeah, let me just take your first point really quick. And I know, again, I don't want to steal Roger's thunder because I know he's going to talk about this too. But look, I really do think, to me, this is a political opportunity and a moment. You know, I was thrilled to see the BMore bus plan come out. While I know that, you know, buses in sort of this ecosystem are a little less sexy than rail in terms of how people, access transit. I think they're incredibly important. And I think in a city like Baltimore, a lot of people ride the bus and they're very inefficient. And there's a lot of challenges and signal prioritization and all the rest. I don't need to tell everyone on this call stuff you already know. But this is my thing. When an agency puts out a plan, it becomes incumbent on all of us, if we believe it is the right plan, to rally around it and to make sure it is not just a plan that sits on the shelf and accumulates dust. We have a governor right now in Westmore who believes deeply in public transportation. We have challenges in terms of federal funding. We know that. We have challenges in terms of state funding. The state is in a difficult economic position. But for me, as a leader of the city of Baltimore, there is no world in which I'm letting any transportation secretary come through on a roadshow and to not hammer home this point that you just made, Klaus, that it's great that you put out this plan. Now fund it. And don't wait 6 years, because the kids that I used to teach in West Baltimore can't wait 6 years to be able to get to school on time. And the older adults who don't live proximate to a supermarket can't wait 6 years to get their groceries. And the people that work at Tree Point Atlantic but live in East or West or North Baltimore can't wait 6 years to get to work. And so I think this is a political opportunity. And I can assure you in how Ethan and my folks, how we've started organizing, this was like the light bulb that went off in my head when BMore Bus Plan came out. It was like, this is the moment. We got to go after it and we got to be aggressive with it. So you got my commitment. Last year it went well. We'll see what happens this year. Again, I know funding is tight, but HUR, BMore Bus, that's what's on the menu.
Thank you. Klaus, did you have another question or comment? No, okay. Lauren?
Thanks, Robin. Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, Councilman Cohen. My name is Lauren Garrett. I am the Community Grants Manager at the BWI Business Partnership. Great to hear your speech today on the call. So two things. One of the first things is I want to give praise to whoever is doing the LinkedIn page for Baltimore City Transportation. The updates every day are fantastic. We do a Transportation Thursday map every week, and I'm always finding so many things that I can add to that map. And that's like overseen by the MAA, or Maryland Aviation Association. So it's really great to have that tie-in for Baltimore City Transportation, and always feel like the folks that we are engaging via our social media are aware of your social media as well. So whoever's doing that is doing a great job, and thank you. The second thing is, I don't expect a comment on this, but this is something that has been thrown my way, and we're trying to figure out how to make this work, is bringing people from the enough identified neighborhoods with Governor Moore's initiative to jobs at the airport. And we haven't had anything come to fruition yet, but this is something that we've heard from multiple layers. People at the airport are interested. People at Maryland State Government are interested. I know certainly if we involved Baltimore City Transportation, if we got in with the workforce development folks, they would be very interested. And if you have any thoughts about that particular piece, getting people in Baltimore City, jobs at the airport, but the caveat is, how do we get them to the airport? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Again, shout out to Veronica Macbeth, who's our DOT leader, and the good social media and the good LinkedIn page that they're doing. Like I said, she's been really a breath of fresh air in that agency, which has had challenges in the past, and so her leadership has been really felt by myself and others. I think getting folks to the airport, critically important. challenging. What I'm going to do, Lauren, after this call is ask my team to connect with Park Heights Renaissance, which is one of the two enough sites. There's one in South Baltimore and there's one in Northwest Baltimore. I think the Northwest Baltimore one, for a couple of reasons, makes a ton of sense. Let me connect with leadership over there and just pitch that we had this call and that you all would be interested. If you could leave your number in the chat, that way I'm going to have Ethan reach out and make the connection, because I think you're absolutely right. These are good jobs and we got to figure out a way to get people there. I'll just say briefly, I used to represent, when I was a city council person, I represented District 1 before I became council president. And one of the parts of my district that really had been pretty badly neglected was O'Donnell Heights. So sort of this, a little bit of a hole in the donut between Baltimore County and Canton and Brewers Hill and all the sort of like growth and development we've seen, the port, Browning Highway, et cetera. And so what we did is we worked with Trade Point Atlantic, we worked with some folks from the port, we worked with MTA, we worked with DOT, and we were able to get a bus line specifically from O'Donnell Heights to the port so that people could access those jobs. It's important because, like you said, if you can't get there, if you don't have a car, you ain't getting that job or you ain't keeping it. And so I definitely think that's a great idea. Let me work on that through and make a connection there. And I appreciate you elevating that exact scenario.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Seeing no more questions or comments in the chat, I'd like to close this segment of the Q&A by just sort of reinforcing Transit Choices support, not only for BMore Bus. We recently had a presentation by Liz Gordon, who did an excellent job. We agree with you that it's an excellent plan. And again, I also don't want to steal Roger or his colleagues' presentation, but it can't just sit on a shelf. So we applaud your commitment as well to really hammer this point home. The other piece that we are strongly advocating for is the fact that we always talk about the red line, we talk about the importance of the red line, we talk about the disappointment of the red line. The truth is that there's no construction money, right, allocated for this project. So that is something that just can't slip between the cracks again. I understand the complications, with potential federal funding, but, I think that, you mentioned Samuel Jordan, we need to kind of, he passed that baton to all of us, to really step up and to make sure that that project comes to fruition. So in closing, please let us know how Transit Choices may continue to support your efforts. We wish you continued success. We thank you for all your hard work and your commitment to really improving and expanding public transit in Baltimore and beyond. And I'd also like to give a special shout out to Ethan, who has been, wonderful in terms of communicating with me and making sure that, this morning's presentation ran smoothly. So thank you, Ethan.
And I'll just give my own shout out to Ethan. Dude is wonky as it gets with transit, but also truly understands the intersection of policy and politics, which is really where I think a lot of this has to live, and does a phenomenal job at not only keeping me on point, but really organizing our entire council around this issue. And that's what you saw last year at the road show. That's what you're going to see again this year, a lot of his labor. So totally agree. And again, just thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody. It is just really meaningful to get to share space with you all. And please know that I am deeply grateful for the work and the organizing and advocacy that you all do, and just appreciate you all a lot.
Thank you, Council President. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next presentation by the Fund for Educational Excellence. We have 4 representatives from that wonderful organization to speak with you today. The first is Roger Schulman. Roger is the president and CEO. We have Corrie Schoenberg. She is the Senior Program Director of Analysis and Engagement. We have Kwane Wyatt, who is the Program Director and Analysis and Engagement, and Jade Johnson, who is Program Manager with Analysis and Engagement. The title of their presentation is Not in Service: How BMore Bus Would Do Right by Baltimore City Public School Students. And a brief synopsis is they are advocating and really going to talk about a recent letter that they issued, a public letter to Governor Moore, urging him to accelerate funding and implementation of BMore Bus. So with that said, welcome all of you. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having us, Robin. It's really good to be here today. I don't know if Robin will remember this, but I first met Robin. We have been for the last several years on the same flight to Manchester, New Hampshire for Thanksgiving, and it is in line waiting to get on a Southwest flight that I first met Robin and heard about the great work you're doing. So it's great to be here, and now we'll have more to talk about at Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Several years we've been on the same flights. So it's really good to be here. Really quickly, for those of you who don't know, the Fund for Educational Excellence is the local education fund for Baltimore City Public Schools. And we work and partner with Baltimore City Public Schools in a number of different ways. One of the ways we do that is by doing qualitative research on issues that we think are critically important. And we anchor that research in the experience of those who are closest to the problem or the challenge we're looking at, question we're looking at. And over the years, we've done 7 different reports. And as we were doing these reports, so often as we were thinking about interventions for kids around issues around college readiness or access to career readiness programs, almost sort of regardless of what the challenge was, any intervention we talked about, we would run up against the challenges connected to transportation. And so about 5 years ago now, we decided to make transportation the focus of one of our reports. And I will let the team describe how we did that, but we learned so much about the challenges that our students in Baltimore City face getting to and from school. And if I'm being very frank about it, I think all of our reports are important, but no report has sustained the amount of traction that this report has over the years that we've been doing this work. So I want to assure everyone, no one's stealing our thunder. We are happy to have as many voices saying as loudly as possible how important this is, including Council President Cohen and his team, including everyone in this group and anyone else who will listen and wants to talk about this issue. We are more than happy to be a part of that, and no one's stealing our thunder in doing so. So I am happy to turn it over to my colleagues, Corrie and Kwane and Jade, who are going to talk us through this presentation. Thanks again for having us.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Corrie, and I'm going to kick us off. So as you all know, in June, the MTA released its BMore bus plan, which is more a vision for better bus service with an emphasis on increased frequency. It's on a 10-year timeline and is currently unfunded, as has already been noted. Full implementation would require a significant expansion of MTA's bus fleet, plus the staffing to make those buses run, and crucially, a new 5th bus division to house the new infrastructure and operations. So why invest in bus service? And Council President Cohen already touched on this, but local bus represents 80% of MTA ridership. It's a big percentage. 90% of MTA core bus riders are low income, and more than 80% of riders come from households without a personal vehicle available. They rely on public transit to get to jobs, school, doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, and anywhere else they need to go. Investing in bus service is an equity issue. It's no secret that implementing BMore Bus will cost money. One way to cover capital costs is to dedicate 5% of the 20.1 billion 6-year Consolidated Transportation Program, or CTP, to the new infrastructure. MTA would also need a 10% increase to its operating budget to run the additional service and perform regular maintenance. And that would mean rebalancing spending from the Transportation Trust Fund to allocate more to transit. Handing it over to Kwan.
Thank you, Corrie.
Oh, we can't hear you, Kwan.
Okay. Can you be better now?
Mm-hmm.
All right. At least 25,000 Baltimore City public school students rely on public transit, primarily buses, to get where they need to go throughout the city. And that number is probably closer to 29,000 realistically. They use public transit not only to get to and from school, but to after school programs, to jobs that they have throughout the school year, summer jobs, internships, etc. And city school students make up about 18% of annual ridership, which isn't a small amount of MTA's core service in Baltimore. For our report, Not in Service, we conducted 30-minute interviews with 274 city school students. And we were aiming to have a sample that was representative both demographically and geographically of Baltimore City public schools, high school population. In terms of race and ethnicity, the students we heard from were generally representative of the high school population, although we did have a slight underrepresentation in our Latinx students in our sample. So these were the 10 biggest themes that came up in the interviews that we had. Most of them fit into two broader categories, with the first category being transit reliability and how it affects students academically and otherwise, and then the second category being student safety. Now, when we talk about student safety, we're talking about generally how students feel when they're going to and from school. For the most part, many students felt okay about their commutes, but there still were plenty who felt uncomfortable or uneasy at certain points, especially when they were at transfer points, not in the neighborhoods that they lived in. We heard about their interactions with bus drivers, sometimes positive, but sometimes when bus drivers aren't friendly or helpful, that could create a negative experience. And even worse, with strangers on transit, including experiencing or witnessing arguments or even physical fights that make the ride stressful. And this is especially harmful in the morning on the way to school, when students witness or experience conflict, their bodies go into fight or flight mode, releasing stress hormones, and that state doesn't just disappear when they get off the bus. Research shows that can linger for hours, and so students get to class, get into the school building, and they're distracted, they're anxious, they're on edge. So even before that first bell rings, they're already at a disadvantage because of what they're carrying into the classroom in a very real way. Students also talked about the steps that they took to make sure that they were safe and protected, being cautious, staying alert, paying close attention to their surroundings. So student safety isn't just about incidents that happen, but it's also about that constant vigilance that young people had to have in order to make that commute safely. And beyond community violence or experiencing that, there's also those stories where we hear about students experiencing violence firsthand. One student told us a story about her and her cousin getting robbed at gunpoint on the way home from school. And way too many young women told us about gender-based harassment while commuting, just comments or encounters from grown men that no one would want their daughters or nieces to experience. So it's not just about getting from point A to point B, but navigating all of those safety concerns along the way. And when transit isn't reliable, it undoubtedly leads to lost learning time. Many students are late to school once a week, often more, and public transit is the main reason that they point to. Even being just 10 minutes late to your first period class can have a negative impact on your grades. And when those lateness pile up, it can be the difference between a student doing well in a class and struggling just to get a C average. The BMore bus plan acknowledges this reality, noting that students want more buses so that if you miss a transfer, when a bus doesn't come when it's supposed to, it doesn't inevitably mean that you're going to miss first period. And those long commutes also eat into time that should be spent doing homework. For some students, it makes it harder for them to keep a job. And to put the scale into perspective, in one school year alone, Baltimore City public school students, high school students, were collectively tardy for their first period class more than 335,000 times. And nearly 80% of students arrived late at least once that school year. Pass to my colleague, Jade.
Interviewed students, we asked them directly what changes the MTA or city schools could make that would make the experience of getting to and from school better for them. So just to highlight, students want more buses more frequently. The MTA should also consider student riders when developing regular bus service, and there should also be increased operational funding to increase the frequency of bus service. Some of the benefits of the BMore bus include increased frequency during the weekdays outside of peak hours. So this additional service would help students who participate in extracurriculars or who rely on transit to get to their jobs. Some of these routes, like the 7 city link routes, would run 10 minutes or less, and it would include service to 21 schools. BMore bus would also ensure fewer transfers for students, which means that they wouldn't encounter as many safety issues, which often happens at these transfer points. So in our letter to the governor, we asked him to fund and implement BMore bus now. MTA's core transit service has been neglected for too long, and MDOT makes billions of dollars in capital investments every year in road and highway expansion, but hasn't made comparable capital investments in improving the MTA since the building of the light rail in the 90s. Students need and deserve frequent, reliable transportation to school, and they needed it years ago. Investing in public transit to help students get to school both safely and on time promotes their future academic and career success, which in turn contributes to the long-term welfare of Baltimore and the economy of the state of Maryland. So some next steps the fund is taking to address the issue of transit is through what we're calling the Student Transit Advocacy Cohort, or STAC for short. With support of a grant from CMTA, our team, along with SOMOS, will run a year-long fellowship for a cohort of 14 students to organize around transit justice for themselves and for their peers. Some of the goals of this project include educating students about how M.MTA works and how it is situated within the state's larger transportation system, and building students' organizing capacity to advocate boldly for the change that they deserve. And that's the end of our presentation, so we're happy to take any questions or comments from you.
Thank you, Jade and colleagues. If you would kindly take down the presentation, that would be helpful. Thank you. So I'd like to kick off this session by asking really a couple of questions. The first is, have you received a response from the governor's office regarding your letter?
We have not. We certainly received a response saying that they received it, but we have not gotten any response to the letter.
So that said, what are your plans for next steps?
Yeah, so I think one of the really important pieces is this last piece or one of the last pieces that Jade just spoke about, which is how we're going to start to engage youth with the support from the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. We have found that youth are incredibly effective voices of their own experiences, and we do these reports in part to lift up their voices, and we're frankly super excited about the opportunity to be working with more students and helping them to advocate for themselves. We think, this data that we present means something. I think it matters, obviously, but I think when we create opportunities for kids to share their own stories in their own voice, it is frankly much harder to say no to them than it is to say no to our letter or not respond. So we are hoping that is going to create a movement and a real, with the idea being that we work with these 14 kids who are then working with more kids in their schools, and we're just passing the word. So that's our immediate next step. And obviously we're excited to participate in the hearing next week and to continue to do our part along with all of you to keep this at the forefront and make it harder and harder to say no to this kind of plan, which is so needed.
Thank you. When you talk about how compelling it is to hear directly from students, a few years ago, we had a presentation from your organization, and I will never, ever forget the videos that were shown, straight from, they weren't narrated. I mean, they sort of followed, I think, 2 or 3 students from the moment they got up, to school and what that experience was like. And I mentioned that so many times about how it stuck with me, because it is much more compelling, to hear from them directly. Lastly, I don't want to take over all of our time, but I wondered, and I mentioned this to Kwane, I think yesterday via email, but are you in touch with Councilman Mark Conway at all? And are you aware that, I don't know if the word is commission, but a bill to kind of study the root causes, the barriers of students getting to school? I invited him to participate today. I believe he had a conflict, but I feel as though this issue, like so many others, take a village, right? And we all need to be speaking from the same page. So I just wondered if you knew, number one, what he's been doing, to advocate on behalf of this issue, and 2, if there's anything that we can do to facilitate, some type of collaboration or partnership, or at least communication with him.
Yeah, so the councilman did reach out to us this summer, and I had a conversation with him this summer. I have to be honest, we've not had a follow-up since then.
Okay.
But we certainly stand at the ready to partner with him, with the whole council, or anybody else who is continuing to push this issue. But it was, if I'm being really honest, it was one brief conversation, and we've not been in touch about it. So.
Yeah, that's fine. I actually reached out. I haven't heard back on what is the status. Has that moved forward? What are next steps? I mean, we certainly support. We know that this is a complex issue, and we know that at the root is funding, which is why, as I mentioned previously to Council President Cohen, our campaign this year is to strongly advocate and amplify the need for dedicated revenue streams, right? Because there are too many key projects that are going by the wayside. I see that there are some messages in the chat, so let's go there. Oh, great. Let's see. Klaus, are you still with us?
Yes, this is not in direct response to the presentations. It's just something I wanted to share with all of us so that we are aware of these bills and that we support them.
Okay, so we're talking about regarding land use and transportation?
Yeah, the 3 bills that make housing easier in the city.
Yes.
And they are starting now to be processed in the Land Use Transportation Committee, and that I want to make sure we support those.
Okay, excellent. Are there any other questions, comments, feedback for the folks at the Fund for Educational Excellence? Mitch? Mitch, you're on mute. Let me see if I can help you. Let me see if I can take you off. Yep, it's not allowing me. Not yet. Oh, there you go, Mitch.
Okay. Since you have just a moment for a quick comment, I'm an outsider. I'm a New Yorker, but I grew up in Baltimore, and I just wanted to say 2 things. One, I thought that the connection between the appeal to student interests is incredibly important. And I hope that Zeke Cohen heard every word of that I was very encouraged by what he had to say also. But I mean, I've been a teacher for 40 years, and all the concerns with anxiety, distraction, coming late, being targeted as a latecomer, and so forth, are absolutely fundamental to the learning experience. And I also know from bus travel in New York City that you often have to wait much longer than you plan to, and it disrupts the rest of your day and creates all of these tensions. The idea of the transfer situation, especially for Black students in neighborhoods they're not accustomed to being in, just is heartbreaking. And so, and I'm an outsider, but I'm an insider from the past. I just want to give complete support. The second comment I wanted quickly to make is, I was telling you before, I read a press report on the Maryland state budget in which Westmore was given credit for raising taxes and fees in order to close a major structural deficit. In that article, the priorities that he was able to save funding for were listed, and transit was not mentioned, which was very disturbing to me. I'm hoping that Zeke Cohen's report of the $800 million restoration answers my anxiety about that. But when Robin, you talked about the lack of funding for construction, it just strikes me that we have tremendous ideas, we have tremendous understanding of problems, and we don't have the material support that can implement the actions that we need to take in order to resolve these problems or address these problems or get going in resolving these problems.
Right.
So I just a shout out to you and to your earlier appeal. I just hope that there are ways to get involved in the political process in Maryland that can address the funding problem.
Well, thank you, Mitch, for your comments. You know, Transit Choices, as well as several other advocacy groups, we spent a lot of time in Annapolis, you know, this 2025 session, testifying, right, in terms of, or on behalf of, we need more transportation funding, and talked very specifically about, you know, where we felt the projects needed, or which projects needed to be funded. And so while we're very happy, you know, with the additional revenue that Governor Moore has allocated for public transportation, the bottom line is that it's not enough, right? We need to do more. So, you know, it's not just, you know, Transit Choices. You know, we have other like advocacy organizations where at every opportunity, we are really driving that message home. And it's not acceptable, you know, just to, it's not an excuse, but, you know, the fallback position is there is no funding. We need to work hard to find that funding, right? Whether it is affecting, you know, our students, whether it's affecting people, you know, their access to jobs, opportunity, healthcare, healthy food, or even people, you know, that live, you know, along the East-West corridor that work at Bayview, you know, that don't have access to a car. So I just wanted to impress upon the fact that, you know, we live and breathe this every single day, and we do everything in our power, you know, to keep these issues front and center. So thank you for your comments.
Amen.
Well, I don't know if there's any other questions or comments, but what I would like to do at this point is to invite Jimmy Rouse, Transit Choices co-founder, to provide some closing remarks.
I want to thank, I've already thanked Zeke, but I want to thank the Fund for Educational Excellence for the work they've been doing and bringing this issue forward. I agree that the student voices are the most effective, and we have to come up with solutions, which means revenue, and that's the issue we need to focus on. But thank you all for the great work you're doing to bring this issue front and center, and we want to help in any way we can. So both to Zeke and to the Fund for Educational Excellence, we're here, and help us. You know, we want to help you. So we just want to make that clear. And then I always want to address all of the attendees to these meetings to say that the very act of listening is an act of advocacy for better transit, because people look at the numbers that we get at these meetings, and that helps us attract top flight people in the transportation arena to come to these meetings and have these kind of discussions, which I think are invaluable. And there's no other place in the city you can get this, where anybody from the public can come in and ask questions of leadership and make comments. And we're the ones that present that opportunity, and there's nowhere else that you can get this. So thank you so much for participating. The numbers keep going up with each meeting, and we hope that continues into the future. So I that's all I have to say, Robin. Thank you all.
Well said. Here, here. So details will be forthcoming regarding our next Transit Choices meeting. But until then, as Jimmy said, thank you. We're very grateful for your ongoing interest in the work we're doing, but also your participation. We wish you a wonderful day. I will be sure to disseminate both the meeting presentations as well as the recording as soon as possible. So have a great day. Thank you all, everyone. Bye-bye.